Hello, everyone. Hello, hello. Oh, yes, gives a little bean treats immediately. How are we doing today? Happy Tuesday. Hey, Wadsworth. Hello, hello. Ooh, a treat and a hydrate for Lil Bean. So spoiled. Oof. How we doing? We doing good? We having a great day? Last night, I watched a movie. Because I realized that the only Oscar nominated movie that I have seen is is Everything Everywhere All at Once. And I want to watch the Oscars, and if that movie doesn't win at literally every single category, then I'm just not going to know any other movie. So, I loved it. It was so, so good. Hey Doodles, hello, hello. Happy Tuesday. So last night, had some people over and we're like, we're gonna watch a movie. And I picked a movie that I have well, I didn't pick the movie. The consensus was this movie that I've never heard of. Absolutely never even heard of. And it is called Triangle of Sadness. And just by the title alone, I was like, yeah, sure. Because, like, I knew it wasn't the war film, because it seems like there's always a war film every single year, and they win, like, a ridiculous amount of awards. But I knew that it wasn't a war film, and all I read from the synopsis was that this model couple goes on a ship. That's all I read. And good God, what a ridiculously wild ride it is. I knew it was a dark comedy as well. And it's really good. It's wild and things just like kept happening and I screamed a couple times. I've never been so uncomfortable in not like real life situations where like I'm in the situation, but like felt actually uncomfortable, but it's really good. So I'm not gonna tell you what happens because there was one person who read the full synopsis and was just like waiting for the rest of the synopsis to actually happen. And said that they wished that they didn't read the full synopsis. So it was it was a time, let me tell you. So if you feel like watching a dark comedy that makes you extremely uncomfortable for a wide variety of reasons, and also watch Woody Harrelson, then that's the movie for you. But it was really, really good. And like the cinematography was amazing. There were several like long shots or just like pan shots that were really, really cool, and like the angles that they got were really, really cool. And it seems like a movie that I could watch again and find little like foreshadowing bits, because the person who like knew what was going to happen, or at least like the main thing that was going to happen, like picked up a couple of them. So I'm interested to see, like, now that I know the rest of the story, if I watch it again, like how many other things can I find that foreshadow what's actually going to happen. But yeah, it was good. It was a good time. Recommend. But yeah, that was last night. A movie on a Monday? Who is this? I went to the library today. You'll check it out for sure. Yes. The only other Oscar-worthy film you've seen was The Menu. Ooh, did you like that? See, that one I have heard of. The other ones I like didn't even hear of. Did you like The Menu? Because I have heard good things about it. M- Monday movies in this economy? Okay, Noodles, you will not imagine. I mean, maybe you will, but I say in this economy, like a ridiculous amount. The acting was really great and you loved it. Okay. Okay. I will need to remember that. No, I won't because I'm going to write it down. I'll just need to remember to read this. Okay. So, the menu. That's good to know that you enjoyed it. Okay. Amazing. Fantastic. You reached a milestone today. Amazing. It was super creepy, but also a love letter to the service industry. Okay, have you worked in or do you work in the service industry? Like, I have not. So, am I going to miss a bunch of things and not completely understand some like references or situations? You will miss things. Okay, cool. I'm assuming I'll still enjoy it, but that's good to know. Maybe I'll watch it with somebody who has You're a lifelong barista. Okay. Yes, I'm sure you have a ton of horror stories. Okay, I will make sure to watch it with somebody who has been in the service industry. Dragonstoy. Okay, okay. I'll have to track him down. I will track Dragonstoy down and we will discuss the menu. So yeah, I will be watching maybe one other movie. The Triangle of Sadness is on Amazon Prime and fully intending to or is on Amazon and fully intending to rent it, but it was free. It was like discounted to free. So I don't know if that's still going on, but if that's something that you like are interested in, there you go. Oh, hey Falcor. Oh, hey. Okay, I'm still going to enjoy it, but there's many subtle nods to service workers. Okay, that's actually really cool. I like that. I like that a lot. Oof. Falcor, we're talking about Oscar nominated movies. I just watched an extremely uncomfortable one last night, Triangle of Sadness, and I did not read the full synopsis, so it was just a wild, wild ride. Good, but extremely uncomfortable and very wild. It's a dark comedy, so if you enjoy those, please, please watch. Okay. You went and grabbed dinner at this little local chicken place. Cute. I love that. All right. I went to the library today and I picked up way too many books. So I'm just going to show you what I did. Show you the damage done. I mean, most of these are just continuing series. So I felt like it was okay. And the series that I'm continuing, they're all manga. So it's fine. You got through 3 chapters of The Hobbit last night. Amazing. How was it? Are you still enjoying reading it? Okay. I'm trying to get organized over here. It is impossible. Okay, let's see. I guess we'll talk about the ones that I'm already continuing. So, Full Metal Alchemist, still continuing. I am considering not continuing. Not because it's not amazing, not because it's not good, but because I am reading other manga right now that are more exciting and like I already know the story of this one because I watched the anime. But I grabbed volume 10. We will see. Okay, you watch Brotherhood. Okay, Falcor, this is exactly like Brotherhood, which is why I feel like I don't need to finish it. And also like towards the like when they go up to I forgot what it's called, but when they like go up north, like that's not my favorite part anyway, and that's starting very soon to happen. So it's like I think I just am not. Okay, Noodles, my favorite comic is Saga. Love it. Love it so, so much. It's so good. It's 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 the best thing that's been ever written. Not exaggerating. I mean, maybe a little. Would not recommend reading in public. Little questionable if you're reading in public. You own the compendium digitally. Yes. Okay. So I am reading that. I am reading Demon Slayer. I'm on volume 14. This is, I think, volume 11 or 10 is when it starts getting into a story arc that has not been adapted to the anime yet. So I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying it. The sword, I forgot what it's called. It's like the swordsmith or the sword something. Something about swords and a person arc. But it's really good. Super loving the super loving Demon Slayer. Okay, and then I have Berserk. So I have volume 10, which is not the volume that I need to read next. I finished 8 and 9 is not ready. But 10 is. So it's just gonna like sit here until I get 9, and then I'm gonna like zip through 9 so that I can read this. It's fine. It's good. If you haven't read Berserk, tons of content warnings. So many. Like every single content warning you could possibly think of is in the series. It's a really good overall story arc though. It is about this guy named Guts who has been cursed by the 5 members of the God Hand. So he has been branded, and what that means is that at night, he is known as a sacrifice. So at night, he is attracting all of these demons who want to kill him. And so his whole journey is to find the 5 members of the God Hand. And it is a wild ride. Very good. It's also very much influencing like all of the Souls games, like Demon Souls, Dark Souls. All of like Miyazaki's work is highly influenced by this. There's also a lot of what is it? Uh, hmm, I can't think of any other words, but yes, it is. You can see a lot of the influence that this book has done. So that's pretty cool. I'm running out of space to throw things, so I'm gonna throw it on the floor. Okay, and then I picked up Book Lovers because this is like a reader's choice for romance. And I know what you're saying. You're gonna say, Moog, you hate romance. And you're not wrong. But I'm trying to read more outside of my comfort zone and to also see like what other people are really enjoying. So maybe I'll like it, maybe I won't. I don't know. I did read, what is it? People You Meet on Vacation by the same author. So, and it was fine. It was fine. It didn't make me poke my eyeballs out, so that's a start. I wouldn't say it was my favorite book of all time or my favorite genre. That didn't make me do anything, but you're not wrong, Noodles. That's the bar. If I have to poke my eyeballs out, then no. It's a no-go. So it's fine. So we'll see about this one. Also it's called Book Lovers, so I better love it. I still have eyes. 10 out of 10 still have eyes. Where the other 8 eyes are, I'm not telling you. And the last book I picked up was totally an impulse pick. I always walk by the like new shelf or the on my toes. Or the like what is it? Like because I'm in Chicago, there's like a ton of different like branches, and so they always like share to like I don't know. They share books. So I grabbed it. It is a science fiction book. And I was like, ooh, this looks like science fiction. And it is. And let me read you the synopsis. I only read like the first two sentences. No, the first three sentences. And then I just grabbed it. So I don't know the rest of the synopsis. Much like Triangle of Sadness, I'm starting to see a trend here. Anyway, I just like to be surprised, apparently. But okay, so it's called Chance by Matthew Fitzsimmons, and it says, I didn't even read the big font here. Nobody knows what's going on in my life. Okay, so it says, cloning is a luxury for the wealthy. For Chance Harker, it's a way of getting on with his lives. 5 years ago, when he was 16, he and his brother Marley were murdered in a kidnapping gone wrong. Chance was revived, and his grieving parents met his existence with anger, neglect, and aversion. That's all I read. And I was like, well, this is mine now. Thank you. And it looks like nobody has read this yet. It has like the new sticker on it, and I need it. I need it. I need this to be in my hands, and it is. So I'm excited for it. So those are the books that I got. When will she have time to read these? Again, nobody knows, but we'll do it. We'll do it. Uh, but today we are going to be continuing on with Vera by Elizabeth von Arnim. You know, just a super cozy, lovely book. No, not at all. We'll do it live. Exactly, exactly. So I do have pinned content warnings for this book, so please be aware. We were surprised by a couple of them, so no more surprise. Hopefully, we'll see. But we are on chapter 12. So what has happened so far? A lot. So we have our two main characters. We have Lucy. I was like, Vera. Vera is not, I mean, she might be, but she's not right now. We have Lucy, who has just lost her dad, who has died, and also like in a new place too. And we have Weems. Oh, Weems, who has lost his wife, Vera. And we have found out that, well, they meet each other in a super adorable meet cute where Lucy is in the garden 3 hours after her dad has died, and Weems is walking by and is like, I must tell everybody about my terrible news. And so like goes and tells Lucy, like, well, if you think your life is terrible right now, this is what's happening to me. And like explains that his wife is dead and that there are questions circulating about whether or not this was an accident. But we're totally glossing over that. Absolutely glossing over that. Weems sort of becomes a comfort for Lucy and Lucy for Weems. Weems is extremely protective and says very creepy things, like telling Lucy to smile more and that, I don't know, uh like my little girl and things like that. Yeah, little girl, like it's gross. And has also, so she has like shorter hair, like a bob almost, or I think it is a bob. And he's like, is she like 12? Is she 20? Nobody knows, but she has like the complexion of like a 12-year-old boy or whatever. And it's just like, please stop, please. So they do have the funeral of Lucy's dad, and that very day, well, everybody thinks that Weems either is a friend of Lucy's dad or a relative, depending on like if that person was a friend, actually a friend of Lucy's dad or a relative. And so that very day, they're having dinner. Lucy, her aunt came and is sort of like helping take care of things and like giving her comfort and everything like that. And Weems is like, you know what? I'm done with all of this sadness. This is stupid. And basically forces them to be happy and to stop talking about death and to stop being so miserable. which is exactly how the grieving process works, right? So Lucy and her aunt go to her aunt's place to get away from, the house that they were in and everything like that. And Lucy's aunt is like sort of taking care of her. And Weems is visiting Lucy pretty regularly. And oh yes, you're right. He really likes turkey. He's visiting pretty regularly, and they decide that they are going to marry, and they're keeping it quiet. And Weems meets the like friends of Lucy's aunt and Lucy's dad, and none of them really like him because obviously. And then the announcement comes out, and Lucy's aunt is Dot, that's her name, Aunt Dottie, is finding herself trying to sort of protect Lucy from all of the antagonism that's like coming, all of like the negativity, even though Dot absolutely does not like Weems, like at all. And we just had the discussion about Christmas, and Weems just assumed that Lucy and her aunt Dot were going to go to Christmas at his place, and ordered double everything, like double the turkey, double the plum pudding, and whatever. And then Lucy's aunt is like, no, we're not, no, we're having Christmas here. Like, obviously, I'm not going to take you away from Lucy during Christmas, but we're gonna be here. And so Weems is having a little fit about that. And I think that's where we left off. Let me double check. Yes. Yes, because the first word is the second word is Christmas. Okay. Is it because they have eyes? I don't know. So yes. Try and get cozy because you're not going to be comforted from this story. Oh, and something that I did not mention, this book came out in 1921 and was met with a lot of backlash because the similarities between the relationship in the book and the relationship that the author had with her husband are suspect. So let's do it. Chapter 12. We are 32% of the way through. Here we go. But Christmas was spent, after all, at Eaton Terrace, and they lived on Weems's turkeys and plum puddings for a fortnight. It was not a very successful Christmas, because Weems was so profoundly disappointed, and Miss Entwistle had the apologeticness of those who try to make up for having got their own way, and Lucy, who had shrunk from the Willows far more than her aunt, wished many times before it was over that they had all gone there. It would have been much simpler in the long run, and much less painful than having to look at Everard being disappointed. Everard is Weems's first name. But at the time, and taken by surprise, she had felt that she couldn't have borne festivities, and still less could she have borne seeing Everard bearing festivities in that house. "This is morbid," he said, when in answer to his questioning she at last told him it was poor Vera's dreadful death there that made her feel she couldn't go, and he explained, holding her in his arms, how foolish it was to be morbid, and how his little girl, who was marrying a healthy, sensible man who, God knew, had had to fight hard enough to keep so, she pressed closer, and yet had succeeded, must be healthily sensible too. Otherwise, if she couldn't do this and couldn't do that because it reminded her of something sad, and couldn't go here and couldn't go there because of somebody's having died, he was afraid she would make both herself and him very unhappy. I like that they're talking like it's not like his wife, but just somebody died. Just somebody happened to have died in the house that he lives in. "Oh, Everard," said Lucy, at that, holding him tight. The thought of making him unhappy, him, her own beloved who had been through such terrible unhappiness already, giving her heart a stab. This little girl must know, he continued, speaking with the grave voice that was natural to him when he was serious. The voice not of the playmate, but of the man she adored, the man she was in love with, in whose hands she could safely leave her earthly concerns. His little girl must know that somebody had died everywhere. There wasn't a spot, there wasn't a house, except quite new ones. Oh, yes, I know, but Lucy tried to interrupt. And the Willows was his home, the home he had looked forward to and worked for and had at last been able to afford to rent on a long lease, a lease so long that it made it practically his very own, and he had spent the last 10 years developing and improving it, and there wasn't a brick or a tree in it in which he didn't take an interest, really, an almost personal interest, and his one thought all these months had been the day when he would show it to her, to his dear future mistress. "Oh, Everard, yes, you shall. I want to," said Lucy incoherently, her cheeks against his. "But only not yet. Not festivities. Please, I won't be so morbid. I promise not to be morbid, but please." And just when she was wavering, just when she was going to give in, not because of his reasoning, for her instincts were stronger than his reasoning, but because she couldn't bear his disappointment, Miss Entwistle, sure now of Lucy's dread of Christmas at the Willows, suddenly turned firm again and announced that they would spend it in Eaton Terrace. So Weems was forced to submit. The sensation was so new to him that he couldn't get over it. Once it was certain that his Christmas was, as he insisted, spoilt, he left off talking about it and went to the other extreme and was very quiet. That his little love should be so much under the influence of her aunt saddened him, he told her. Lucy tried to bring gaiety into this attitude by pointing out the proof she was giving him of how very submissive she was to the person she happened to live with. "And presently all my submissiveness will be concentrated on you," she said gaily. But he wouldn't be gay. He shook his head in silence and filled his pipe. He was too deeply disappointed to be able to cheer up, and the expression "happen to live with" jarred a little. Definitely acting like a little emo snot. There was an airy carelessness about the phrase. One didn't happen to live with one's husband, yet that had been the implication. Every year in April, Weems had a birthday. That is, unlike most people of his age, he regularly celebrated it. Christmas and his birthday were the festivals of the year for him, and were always spent at the Willows. He regarded his birthday, which was the 4th of April, as the first day of spring, defying the calendar, and was accustomed to find certain yellow flowers in bloom down by the river on that date, supporting his contention. If these flowers came out before his birthday, he took no notice of them, treating them as non-existent. Nor did he ever notice them afterwards, for he did not easily notice flowers, but his gardener had standing orders to have a bunch of them on the table that one morning in the year to welcome him, with their bright, shiny faces, when he came down to his birthday breakfast. And coming in and seeing them, he said, "My birthday and Spring's," whereupon his wife, up to now it had been Vera, but from now it will be Lucy, kissed him and wished him many happy returns. Definite child energy right here. This was the ritual. And when one year of abnormal cold, the yellow flowers weren't there at breakfast, because neither by the river's edge nor in the sheltered of the swamps had the increasingly frantic gardener been able to find them, the entire birthday was dislocated. He couldn't say on entering the room and beholding them, "My birthday and Spring's," because he didn't behold them, and his wife, that year Vera, couldn't kiss him and wish him many happy returns because she hadn't the cue. She was so much used to the cue that not having it made her forget her part, forget, indeed, his birthday altogether, and consequently, it was a day of the extremest spiritual chill and dinginess, matching the weather without. Weems had been terribly hurt. He hoped never to spend another birthday like it. Nor did he, for Vera remembered it after that. Birthdays being so important to him, he naturally reflected after Miss Entwistle had spoilt his Christmas that she would spoil his birthday too, if he let her. Well, he wasn't going to let her. Not twice would he be caught like that. Not twice would he be caught in a position of helplessness on his side and power on hers. The way to avoid it was very simple. He would marry Lucy in time for his birthday. Why should they wait any longer? Why stick to that absurd convention of the widower's year? No sensible man minded what people thought. And who were the people? Surely one didn't mind the opinions of those shabby weeds he had met on the 2 Thursday evenings at Lucy's aunt's. Hello, Star. Welcome in. Hi, hi, hi. The little they had said had been so thoroughly unsound and muddled and yet dangerous, that if they, one and all, emigrated tomorrow, England would only be the better. After meeting them, he had said to Lucy, who had listened in some wonder at this new light thrown on her father's friends, that they were the very stuff of which successful segregation was made. In an island by themselves, he told her, they would be quite happy, undermining each other's backbones, and the backbone of England, which consisted of plain unspoilt patriots, would be let alone. They, certainly, didn't matter. While as for his own friends, those friends who had behaved badly to him on Vera's death, not only didn't he care twopence for their criticisms, but he could hardly wait for the moment when he would confound them by producing for their inspection this sweetest of little girls, so young, so devoted to him, Lucy, his wife. He accordingly proceeded to make all the necessary arrangements for being married in March, for going for a trip to Paris, and for returning to the Willows for the final few days of his honeymoon on the very day of his birthday. What a celebration that would be. Weems, thinking of it, shut his eyes so as to dwell upon it undisturbed. Never would he have had a birthday like this one. He might really quite fairly call it his first, for he would be beginning life all over again and entering on years that would indeed be truthfully described as tender. So much was it his habit to make plans privately and not mention them till they were complete, that he found it difficult to tell Lucy of this one in spite of the important part she was to play in it. It is not a salt shaker. This little one, is this the one that you're talking about? So it actually is supposed to go into the mug, like at the bottom, but it broke off. But it totally does look like a little salt shaker. Yes, the one in back into the mug. Mm-hmm. So much was it his habit to make plans privately and not mention them incomplete. Wait a minute. Okay, yes, okay. I was going to say, we've already read that, but that was for Christmas. Excuse me. So much was his habit to make plans privately and not mention them till they were complete, that he found it difficult to tell Lucy of this one, in spite of the important part she was to play in it. But, after all, some preparing would, he admitted to himself, be necessary even for the secret marriage he had decided on at the registrar's office. She would have to pack a bag. She would have to leave her belongings in order. Also, he might perhaps have to use persuasion. He knew his little girl well enough to be sure she would relinquish church and white satin without a murmur at his request. But she might want to tell her aunt of the marriage's imminence, and then the aunt would, to a dead certainty, obstruct, and either induce her to wait till the year was out, or, if Lucy refused to do this, make her miserable with doubts as to whether she had been right to follow her lover's wishes. Fancy making a girl miserable because she followed her lover's wishes. What a woman, thought Weems, filling his pipe. In his eyes, Miss Entwistle had swollen since her conduct at Christmas to the bulk of a monster. Totally realistic. Absolutely realistic. Oh, Star, thank you so much for contributing to Sunday's stream. It'll be good. We'll be continuing Monkey Island. Because the game that said that it was 6 hours didn't do it by Moog standards. Didn't time it by Moog standards, I should say. A slow Moog. Getting through life. Here we go. Having completed his preparations and fixed his wedding day for the first Saturday in March, Weems thought it time he told Lucy. So he did, though not without a slight fear at the end that she might make difficulties. My little love isn't going to do anything that spoils Sir Everard's plans after all the trouble he has taken, he said, seeing that with her mouth slightly open she gazed at him in an obvious astonishment and didn't say a word. He then proceeded to shut the eyes that were gazing up into his, and the surprised parted lips, with kisses, for he had discovered that gentle, lingering kisses hushed Lucy quiet when she was inclined to say, "But," and brought her back quickly than anything to the mood of tender, half-asleep acquiescence in which, as she lay in his arms, he most loved her. Then indeed she was his baby, the object of the passionate protectiveness he felt he was naturally filled with, but for the exercise of which circumstances up to now had given him no scope. Weems, just stop. Just stop. With the third person. Yes. How dare you not be an expert at a game genre you've never played? I'm sorry. You couldn't passionately protect Vera. She was always in another room. Lucy, however, did say, "But," when she recovered from her first surprise, and did presently, directly, that is, he left off kissing her, and she could speak, make difficulties. Her aunt, the secrecy. Why secrecy? Why not wait? It was so necessary under the circumstances to wait. And then he explained about his birthday. At that she gazed at him again with a look of wonder in his eyes, and after a moment began to laugh. She laughed a great deal, and with her arm tight around his neck, but her eyes were wet. "Oh, Everard," she said, her cheek against his, "do you think we're really old enough to marry?" This time, however, he got his way. Lucy found she couldn't bring herself to spoil his plans a second time. The spectacle of his prolonged, silent disappointment at Christmas was still too vividly before her. Nor did she feel she could tell her aunt. She hadn't the courage to face her aunt's expostulations and final distressed giving in. Her aunt, who loomed so enormous in Weems's eyes, seemed to Lucy to be only half the size she used to be. She seemed to have been worried small by her position, like a bone among contending dogs, in the middle of different indignations. What would be the effect on her of this final blow? The thought of it haunted Lucy and spoilt all the last days before her marriage, days which she otherwise would have loved, because she very quickly became infected by the boyish delight and excitement over their secret that made Weems hardly able to keep still in his chair. You thought of an ending of the story that you'd be happy with, but you know that they'd never do it. Yeah, I don't think this story's gonna have a happy ending. Just stop. He didn't keep still in it. Once, at least, he got up and did some slow steps about the room, moving with an apparent solemnity because of not being used to such steps, which he informed her presently were a dance. Till he told her this, she watched him, too much surprised to say anything. So did penguins dance in pictures. She couldn't think what was the matter with him. When he had done and told her, breathing a little harder, that it was a dance symbolic of married happiness, she laughed and flew to hug him. Oh, baby, she said, rubbing her cheek up and down his coat. Who's another baby? He said, breathless but beaming. Such was their conversation. But poor Aunt Dot. Lucy couldn't bear to think of poor little kind Aunt Dot. She had been so wonderful, so patient, and she would be deeply horrified by a runaway marriage. Never, never would she understand the reason for it. She didn't a bit understand Everard, didn't begin to understand him, and that his birthday should be a reason for breaking what she would regard as the common decencies, of course, only seemed to her too childish to be even discussed. Lucy was afraid Aunt Dot was going to be very much upset. Poor darling little Aunt Dot. Conscience-stricken, she couldn't do enough for Aunt Dot now that the secret date was fixed. She watched for every possible want during their times alone, flew to fetch things, darted at dropped handkerchiefs, kissed her not only at bedtime and in the morning, but whenever there was the least excuse, and with the utmost tenderness. And every kiss and every look seemed to say, "Forgive me." Are they going to run away? Wondered Miss Entwistle presently. Lucy would have been immensely taken aback, and perhaps, such is one's perversity, even hurt, if she could have seen the ray of hope which at this thought lit her Aunt Dot's exhausted mind. For Miss Entwistle's life, which had been a particularly ordered and calm one up to the day when Weems first called at Eaton Terrace, had since then been nothing but just confused clamor. Everybody was displeased with her, and each for directly opposite reasons. She had fallen on evil days, and they had by February been going on so long that she felt worn out. Weems, she was quite aware, disliked her heartily. Her Jim was dead. Lucy, her one living relative, so tenderly loved, was every day disappearing further before her very eyes into Weems's personality, into what she sometimes was betrayed by fatigue and impatience into calling to herself the Weems Maw. And her little house, which had always been so placid, had become, she warily felt, the cockpit of London. She used to crawl back to it with footsteps that lagged more and more the nearer she got. After her enforced, prolonged daily outings, enforced and prolonged because the house couldn't possibly hold both herself and Weems except for the briefest moments, and drearily wonder what letters she would find from Jim's friends scolding her, and what fresh arrangements in the way of tiring motor excursions or invitations to tea at that dreadful house in Lancaster Gate would be sprung upon her. Did all engagements pursue such a turbulent course? She asked herself. She had given up asking the Oracle of Chesham Street anything because of her disconcerting answers. How glad she was she had never been engaged. How glad she was she had refused the offers she had had when she was a little girl. Quite recently she had met one of those would-be husbands in an omnibus, and how glad she was when she looked at him that she had refused him. People don't keep well, mused Miss Entwistle. If Lucy would only refuse Weems now, how glad she would be that she had when she met him in 10 years' time in an omnibus. But these, of course, were merely the reflections of a tired-out spinster, and she still had enough spirit to laugh at them to herself. After all, whatever she might feel about Weems, Lucy adored him, and when anybody adores anybody as much as that, Miss Entwistle thought, The only thing to do is to marry and have done with it. No, that was cynical. She meant marry and not have done with it. Ah, if only the child were marrying the nice, young Teddy Trevor, her own age, and so devoted, and with every windowsill throughout his house in Chelsea the proper height. Miss Entwistle was very unhappy all this time, besides having feet that continually ached. Though she dreaded the marriage, yet she couldn't help feeling that it would be delicious to be able once more to sit down. How enchanting to sit quietly in her own empty drawing room and not have to walk about London any more. How enchanting not to make any further attempts to persuade herself that she enjoyed Battersea Park and liked the Embankment and was entertained by Westminster Abbey. What she wanted with an increasing longing that amounted at last to desperation as the winter dragged on was her own chair by the fire and an occasional middle-aged crony to tea. She had reached the time of life when one likes sitting down. Also, she had definitely got to the period of cronies. One's contemporaries, people who had worn the same kinds of clothes as oneself in girlhood, who remembered bishops' sleeves and could laugh with one about bustles. How very much one longed for one's contemporaries, when then Lucy's behavior suddenly became so markedly attentive and so very tender, when she caught her looking at her with wistful affection and flushing on being caught, when her good nights and good mornings were many kisses instead of one, and she kept on jumping up and bringing her teaspoons she hadn't asked for and sugar she didn't want, Miss Entwistle began to revive. Is it possible they're going to run away? She wondered. And so much reduced was she that she very nearly hoped so. Are we just going to forget the fact that the aunt mentioned how she would have been totally fine? Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah. I forgot about that. So yes, we are going to forget. I totally forgot about that. I'm I'm grateful that you didn't. Oh, that was the end of chapter 12. Noodles, what's the summary? I'm glad you're reading this book because I would not have the strength to do it. My lord, give me strength. Chapter 12, Weems. Just... that seems appropriate. Alright, chapter 13. 36% of the way through. Lucy had meant to do exactly as Weems said, and keep her marriage secret. Creeping out of the house quietly, going off with him abroad after the registrar had bound them together, and telegraphing or writing to her aunt from some safe distant place en route like Boulogne. But on saying good night the evening before the wedding day, to her very great consternation, her aunt, whom she was in the act of kissing, suddenly pushed her gently a little away, looked at her a moment, and then holding her by both arms, said with conviction, "It's tomorrow." Lucy could only stare. She stared idiotically, open-mouthed, her face scarlet. If Weems was born in 1989, he'd be living in a Hot Topic. Yes, accurate. She looked and felt both foolish and frightened. Aunt Dot was uncanny. If she had discovered, how had she discovered? And what was she going to do? But had she discovered, or was it just something she chanced to remember? Some engagement Lucy had naturally forgotten, or perhaps only somebody coming to tea? She clutched at the straw. "What is tomorrow?" she stammered, scarlet with fright and guilt. And her aunt made herself perfectly clear by replying, "Your wedding." Then Lucy fell on her neck and cried and told her everything. And her wonderful, unexpected, uncanny, adorable little aunt, instead of being upset and making her feel too wicked and ungrateful to live, was full of sympathy and understanding. They sobbed together, sitting on the sofa locked in each other's arms, but it was a sweet sobbing, for they both felt at this moment how much they loved each other. Miss Entwistle wished she had never had a single critical, impatient thought of the man this darling little child so deeply loved, and Lucy wished she had never had a single secret from this darling little aunt Everard so blindly didn't love. Dear, dear little Aunt Dot. Lucy's heart was big with gratitude and tenderness and pity. Pity because she herself was so gloriously happy and surrounded by love, and Aunt Dot's life seemed, compared to hers, so empty, so solitary, and going to be like that till the end of her days. And Miss Entwistle's heart was big with yearning over this lamb of Jim's who was giving herself with such fearlessness, all lit up by radiant love, into the hands of a strange husband. Presently, of course, he wouldn't be a strange husband. He would be a familiar husband. But would he be any the better for that? She wondered. They sobbed and kissed and sobbed again, each keeping half her thoughts to herself. This is how it was that Miss Entwistle walked into the registrar's office with Lucy next morning, and was one of the witnesses of the marriage. Weems had a very bad moment when he saw her come in. His heart gave a great thump, such as it had never done in his life before, for he thought there was to be a hitch, and that at the very last moment he was somehow not going to get his Lucy. Then he looked at Lucy and was reassured. Her face was like the morning of a perfect day in its cloudlessness. Her love-in-a-mist eyes were dewy with tenderness as they rested on him, and her mouth was twisted up by happiness into the sweetest, funniest little crooked smile. If only she would take off her hat, thought Weems, bursting with pride, so that the registrar could see how young she looked with her short hair. Why, perhaps the old boy might think she was too young to be married and start asking searching questions. What fun that would be. He himself produced the effect on Miss Entwistle, as he stood next to Lucy being married, of an enormous schoolboy who had just won some silver cup or other for his house after immense exertions. Falcor, I don't know. He had exactly that glowing face of suppressed triumph and pride. He was red with delighted achievement. "Put the ring on your wife's finger," ordered the registrar when, having got through the first part of the ceremony, Weems, busy beaming down at Lucy, forgot there was anything more to do. And Lucy struck up her hand with all the fingers spread out and stiff, and her face beamed, too, with happiness at the words, "your wife." "Nothing is here for tears," quoted Miss Entwistle to herself, watching the blissful absorption with which they were both engaged in getting the ring successfully over the knuckle of the proper finger. "He really is a dear. Yes, of course, but how weird it is. I wonder what he was doing this day last year, he and that poor other wife of his." When it was over, and they were outside on the steps with the taxi Weems had come in waiting to take them to the station, Miss Entwistle realized that here was the place and moment of goodbye, and that not only could she go no further with Lucy, but that from now on she could do nothing more for her, except love her, except listen to her. She would always be there to love and to listen to her. But happiest of all it would be for the little thing if she never, from her, were to need either of those services. At the last moment she put her hand impulsively on Weems's breast and looked up into his triumphant, flushed face and said, "Be kind to her." "Oh, Aunt Dot," laughed Lucy, turning to hug her once more. "Oh, Aunt Dot," laughed Weems, vigorously shaking her hand. They went down the steps, leaving her standing alone on the top, and she watched the departing taxi with the two heads bobbing up and down at the window, and the four hands waving goodbyes. That taxi window could never have framed in so much triumph, so much radiance before. Well, well, thought Aunt Dot, going down in her turn when the last glimpse of them had disappeared, and walking slowly homeward, and she added, after a space of further reflection, "He really is, a dear." End of chapter 13. Well, they did it. They're married. Mazel tov. All right. Chapter 14. We're 37% of the way through. That one was a short chapter. Here we go. Dot is so close to being awesome, and then she just kind of yes, I agree with you. Absolutely. She had her moment of almost standing up to Weems, um, to say, like, no, you two cannot see each other. And then just backed away. Like, she definitely doesn't enjoy the relationship or like Weems as a person or as a person who is with Lucy, but is just letting it happen. Like, there's so many red flags. And here we are. Lucy loves her enough that maybe Dot could have swayed her. Yeah, I think so. I think so too. Yeah, I think Dot could have stopped her, but that would be a completely different story and probably have a happy ending. Whereas this one, All right. Chapter 14. Marriage, Lucy found, was different from what she had supposed. Everard was different. Everything was different. For one thing, she was always sleepy. For another, she was never alone. She hadn't realized how completely she would never be alone, or if alone, not sure for 1 minute to the other of going on being alone. Always in her life there had been intervals during which she recuperated in solitude from any strain. Now, there were none. You loved her bit about being glad she refused those men in her youth. Yes. Yes, I agree. Yes. And like that she was able to look back and be like, "Oh, well, I guess it was just like a passing thing." And now like I'm so glad that I did not end up with this person. Mhm. Mhm. Well, and even the conversation that she had with the neighbor that was like, or a friend that was a widow, and just saying like, "Don't get married. Like it's a trap," like Admiral Akbar style. Chapter 13. I missed this chapter, sorry. Noodles, they're married now. They got married. It's happened. Aunt Lucy was there. Or Aunt Lucy, Aunt Dot was there. Chapter 13. Why? Yeah. Yeah. That's the big question. Hmm. Always there had been places she could go to and rest in quietly, safe from interruption. Now there were none. The very sight of the room at the hotels they stayed at, with Weems's suitcase and clothes piled on the chairs, and the table covered with his brushes and shaving things, for he wouldn't have a dressing room, being too natural and wholesome, he explained, to want anything separate from his own woman. The very sight of this room fatigued her. After a day of churches, pictures, and restaurants, he was a most conscientious sightseer. Besides being greatly interested in his meals, to come back to this room wasn't rest, but further fatigue. Weems, who was never tired and slept wonderfully, it was the soundness of his sleep that kept her awake, but she wasn't used to hearing sound sleep so close, would fling himself into the one easy chair and pull her onto his knee. And having kissed her a great many times, he would ruffle her hair, and then, when it was all on ends like a boy's coming out of a bath, look at her with the pride of possession and say, "There's a wife for a respectable British businessman to have. Mrs. Weems. Aren't you ashamed of yourself?" And then there would be more kissing, jovial, gluttonous kisses that made her skin rough and chapped. "Baby," she would say, feebly struggling and smiling, a little weary. Yes, he was a baby. A dear, high-spirited baby. But a baby now at very close quarters, and one that went on all the time. You couldn't put him in a cot and give him a bottle and say, "There now," and then sit down quietly to have a sewing. You didn't have Sundays out. You were never day or night, an instant off duty. Lucy couldn't count the number of times a day she had to answer the question, "Who's my own little wife?" At first she answered it with laughing ecstasy, running into his outstretched arms, but very soon that fatal sleepiness set in and remained with her for the whole of her honeymoon, and she really felt too tired sometimes to get the ecstasy she quickly got to know was expected of her into her voice. She loved him. She was indeed his own little wife, but constantly to answer this and questions like it satisfactorily was a great exertion. Yet if there was a shadow of hesitation before she answered, a hair's breadth of delay owing to her thoughts having momentarily wandered, Weems was upset, and she had to spend quite a long time reassuring him with the fondest whispers and caresses. Her thoughts mustn't wander, she had discovered. Her thoughts were to be his as well as all the rest of her. She was a girl so much loved. She was, was ever a girl so much loved? She asked herself, astonished and proud. But on the other hand, she was dreadfully sleepy. Any thinking she did had to be done at night, when she lay awake because of the immense emphasis with which Weems slept, and she hadn't been married a week before she was reflecting what a bad arrangement it was, the way ecstasy seemed to have no staying power. Also, it oughtn't to begin, she considered, at its utmost height, and accordingly not be able to move except downwards. If she could only start modestly in marriage with very little of it and work steadily upwards, taking one's time, knowing there was more and more to come, it would be much better, she thought. No doubt it would go on longer if one slept better and hadn't consequently got headaches. Everard's ecstasy went on. Perhaps by ecstasy she really meant high spirits, and Everard was beside himself with high spirits. Yeah, this took an insanely fast turn. Because I'm imagining that their honeymoon is like a week, maybe 2 weeks, a month, but like, it was fast to be this tired so quickly. Weems was indeed the typical bridegroom of the Psalms, issuing forth rejoicing from his chamber. Lucy wished she could issue forth from it rejoicing too. She was vexed with herself for being so stupidly sleepy, for not being able to get used to the noise beside her at night and go to sleep as naturally as she did in Eaton Terrace, in spite of the horns of taxis. It wasn't fair to Everard, she felt, not to find a wife in the morning matching him in spirits. Perhaps, however, this was a condition peculiar to honeymoons, and marriage, once the honeymoon was over, would be a more tranquil state. Things would settle down when they were back in England, to a different, more separated life, in which there would be time to rest, time to think, time to remember, while he was away at his office, how deeply she loved him. And surely she would learn to sleep, and once she slept properly, She would be able to answer his loving questions throughout the day with more real elan. It's just food poisoning, I swear. Why is everyone so suspicious? Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's a lot of I mean, this is a constant feeling, but definite uneasy something is going to happen. And it's just been removed from Aunt Dot more towards Lucy. Interesting. But there in England, waiting for her, inevitable, no longer to be put off or avoided, was the Willows. Whenever her thoughts reached that house, they gave a little jump and tried to slink away. She was ashamed of herself. It was ridiculous, and Everard's attitude was plainly the sensible one, and if he could adopt it, surely she, who hadn't gone through that terrible afternoon that July, could. Yet she failed to see herself in the Willows. She failed altogether to imagine it. Yeah, the uneasy undertone, for sure, for sure. That's the thing. Clearly the writer wants us to feel tension, and that doesn't make it any easier to. How, for instance, was she going to sit on the terrace? We always have tea in fine weather on the terrace, Weems had casually remarked, apparently quite untouched by the least memory. How was she going to have tea on the very flags, perhaps, where... Her thoughts slunk away, but not before one of them had sent a curdling whisper through her mind. The tea would taste of blood. Well, this was sleeplessness. She never in her life had had that sort of absurd thought. It was just that she didn't sleep, and so her brain was relaxed and let the reins of her thinking go slack. The day her father died, it's true, when it began to be evening and she was afraid of the night alone with him in his mysterious indifference, she had begun thinking absurdly, but Everard had come and saved her. He could save her from this, too, if she could tell him. Only she couldn't tell him. How could she spoil his joy in his home? It was the thing he loved next best to her. As the honeymoon went on and Weems's ecstasies a little subsided, as he began to tire of so many trains. After Paris, they did the chateau country, and hotels and waiters and taxis and restaurants, and the cooking which he had at first enjoyed now only increased his longing at every meal for a plain English steak and boiled potatoes. He talked more and more of the Willows. With almost the same eagerness as that which had so much enchanted and moved her before their marriage when he talked of their wedding day, he now talked of the Willows and the day when he should show it to her. He counted the days now to that day, the 4th of April, his birthday. On that happy day he would lead his little wife into the home he loved. How could she, when he talked like that, do anything but pretend enthusiasm and looking forward? He had apparently entirely forgotten what she had told him about her reluctance to go there at Christmas. She was astonished that, when the first bliss of being married to her had worn off and his thoughts were free for this other thing he so much loved, his home, he didn't approach it with more care for what he must know was her feeling about it. She was still more astonished when she realized that he had entirely forgotten her feelings about it. It would be, she felt, impossible to shadow his happiness at the prospect of showing her his home by any reminder of her reluctance. Besides, she was certainly going to have to live at the Willows. So, what was the use of talking? I suppose, she did say hesitatingly one day when he was describing it to her for the 100th time, for it was his habit to describe the same thing often, "You've changed your room." They were sitting at the moment, resting after the climb up on one of the terraces of the chateau of Amboise, with a view across the Lou of an immense horizon, and Weems had been comparing it to its disadvantage when he recovered his breath, with the view from his bedroom window at the willows. It wasn't very nice weather, and they both were cold and tired, and it was still only 11 o'clock in the morning. Change my room? What room? He asked. The room the room you slept in? My bedroom? I should think not. It's the best room in the house. Why do you think I've changed it? And he looked at her with a surprised face. Oh, I don't know, said Lucy, taking refuge in stroking his hand. I only thought. An inkling of what was in her mind penetrated into his, and his voice went grave. You mustn't think, he said. You mustn't be morbid. Now, Lucy, I can't have that. It will spoil everything if you let yourself be morbid. And you promised me before our marriage you wouldn't be. Have you forgotten? He turned to her and took her face in both his hands and searched her eyes with his own very solemn eyes, while the woman who was conducting them over the castle went to the low parapet and stood with her back to them, studying the view and yawning. Oh, Everard, of course I haven't forgotten. I've not forgotten anything I promised you, and never will. But have I got to go into that bedroom, too? He was really astonished. Have you got to go into that bedroom, too? He repeated, staring at the face enclosed in his two big hands. It looked extraordinarily pretty like that, like a small flower in its delicate whiteness next to its discolored, middle-aged hands, and her mouth, since her marriage, seemed to have become an even more vivid red than it used to be, and her eyes were young enough to be made more beautiful instead of less by the languor of want of sleep. Well, I should think so. Aren't you my wife? Yes, said Lucy, but... Now, Lucy, I'll have no buts, he said, with his most serious air, kissing her on the cheek. She had discovered that just that kind of kiss was a rebuke. Those buts of yours butt in. You wouldn't be... Have you forgotten? Oh, wait, hold on. Hold on. I feel like I skipped a page. I did. There we go. Those butts of yours butt in. He stopped, struck by what he had said. I think that was rather amusing, don't you? He asked, suddenly smiling. Oh, yes, very, said Lucy eagerly, smiling too, delighted that he should switch off from solemnity. He kissed her again, this time a real kiss, on her funny, charming mouth. I suppose you'll admit, he said, laughing and squeezing up her face into a quaint, crumpled shape, that either you are my wife or not my wife, and that if you are my wife... Oh, I'm that all right, laughed Lucy. Then you share my room. None of those damned newfangled notions for me, young woman. Oh, but I didn't mean... What? Another butt? He exclaimed, pouncing down on her mouth and stopping it with an enormous kiss. Monsieur et Madame... Oh man, and then I have no idea what this next word is. I thought I could be really fancy and start speaking French, but I can't. Apologies. Pretend I'm speaking fluent French, and you're all amazed, said the woman, turning round and drawing her shawl closer over her chest as a gust of chilly wind swept over the terrace. They were honeymooners, poor creatures, and therefore one had patience, but even honeymooners oughtn't to wish to embrace in a cold wind on an exposed terrace of a chateau round which they were being conducted by a woman who was in a hurry to return to the preparation of her Sunday dinner. For such purposes hotels were provided, and the shelter of a comfortable, warm room. She had supposed them to be père et fille when first she admitted them, but was soon aware of their real relationship. I don't know. There's some more French. There's some more French having. Father and daughter, yes. Their real relationship is father and daughter. Oh, I'm sorry. Their real relationship is not father and daughter. I understand. Yes, I get it. I got there. Even the French themselves don't speak French so well. Simply amazing. So gross. Absolutely. Come along, said Weems, getting up quickly, for he too felt the gust of cold wind. Let's finish the chateau, or we'll be late for lunch. I wish they hadn't preserved so many of these places. One would have been quite enough to show us the sort of thing. But we needn't go and look at them all, said Lucy. Oh, yes, we must. We've arranged to. But Everard, began Lucy, following after him as he followed after the conductress, who had a way of darting out of sight round the corner. This woman's like a lizard, panted Weems, arriving round a corner only to see her disappear through an arch. Won't we be happy when it's time to go back to England and not have to see any more sights? But why don't we go back now, if you don't like it? Asked Lucy, trotting after him as he, on his big legs, pursued the retreating conductress, and anxious to show him, by eagerness to go sooner to the Willows than was arranged, that she was being morbid. Why, you know we can't leave before the 3rd of April, said Weems over his shoulder. It's all settled. But can't it be unsettled? What, and upset all the plans, and arrive home before my birthday? He stopped and turned round to stare at her. Really, my dear, he said. She had discovered that my dear was a term of rebuke. Oh, yes, of course, she said hastily. I forgot about your birthday. Oh, no. At that, Weems stared at her harder than ever, incredulously, in fact. Forgot about his birthday. Lucy had forgotten. If it had been Vera, now, but Lucy. He was deeply hurt. He was so much hurt that he stood quite still, and the conductress was obliged, on discovering that she was no longer being followed, to wait once more for the honeymooners, which she did, clutching her shawl round her abundant French chest and shivering. What had she said? Lucy hurriedly asked herself, nipping over her last words in her mind, for she had learned by now what she looked like when he was hurt. Oh, yes, the birthday. How stupid of her. But it was because birthdays in her family were so unimportant, and nobody had minded whether they were remembered or not. I didn't mean that, she said earnestly, laying her hand on his breast. Of course I hadn't forgotten anything so precious. It only had, well, you know what even the most wonderful things do sometimes. It had escaped my memory. Lucy, escaped your memory, the day to which you owe your husband? Weems said this with such an exaggerated solemnity, such an immense pomposity, that she thought he was in fun and hadn't really minded about the birthday at all, and eager to meet every mood of his, she laughed. Relieved, she was so unfortunate as to laugh merrily. To her consternation, after a moment's further stare, he turned his back on her without a word and walked on. Then she realized what she had done, that she had laughed. Oh, how dreadful! In the wrong place. And she ran after him and put her arm through his and tried to lay her cheek against his sleeve, which was difficult because of the way their paces didn't match, and was also because he took no notice of her and said, Baby, baby, were his dear feelings hurt then? And coaxed him. But he wouldn't be coaxed. She had wounded him too deeply. Laughing, he said to himself, at what was to him the most sacred thing in life, the fact that he was her husband, that she was his wife. Oh, Everard, she murmured at last, withdrawing her arm, giving up. Don't spoil our day. Spoil their day. He. That finished it. He didn't speak to her again till night. Then in bed, after she had cried bitterly for a long while, because she couldn't make out what really had happened, and she loved him so much and wouldn't hurt him for the world, and was heartbroken because she had, and anyhow was tired out, he at last turned to her and took her in his arms again and forgave her. I can't live, sobbed Lucy. I can't live if you don't go on loving me, if we don't understand. My little love, said Weems, melted by the way her small body was shaking in his arms, and rather frightened too at the excess of her woe. My little love, don't. You mustn't. Your Everard loves you, and you mustn't give way like this. You'll be ill. Think how miserable you'd make him then. And in the dark he kissed away her tears and held her close till her sobbing quieted down, and presently, held close like that, his kisses shutting her smarting eyes, she, now the baby, comforted and reassured, and he the soothing nurse, she fell asleep, and for the first time since her marriage, slept all night. End of chapter 14. Just a dash or two of manipulation? Terrible. Chapter 14. Well. Yeah. I am also worried for Lucy's safety. Absolutely. Absolutely. Something is going to happen. For sure. For sure, for sure. Lucy. Lucy, Lucy, Lucy. Girl, you should have left. All right. Chapter 15. We're 41% of the way through. Early in their engagement, Weems had expounded his theory to Lucy that there should be the most perfect frankness between lovers, while as for husband and wife, there oughtn't to be a corner anywhere about either of them, mind, body, or soul, which couldn't be revealed to the other one. You can talk about everything to your Everard, he assured her. Tell him your innermost thoughts, whatever they may be. You need no more be ashamed of telling him than of thinking them by yourself. He is you. You and he are one in mind and soul now, and when he is your husband, you and he will become perfect and complete by being one in body as well. Everard, Lucy. Lucy, Everard. We shan't know where one ends and the other begins. That, little love, is real marriage. What do you think of it? I'm gonna say no. No, not marriage. Not real marriage. Terrible. Lucy thought so highly of it that she had no words with which to express her admiration, and fell to kissing him instead. What ideal happiness, to be forever removed from the fear of loneliness by the simple expedient of being doubled, and who so happy as herself to have found the exactly right person for this doubling, one she could so perfectly agree with and understand. She felt quite sorry. She had nothing in her mind in the way of thoughts she was ashamed of to tell him then and there, but there wasn't a doubt. There wasn't a shred of anything a little wrong, not even an unworthy suspicion. Her mind was a chalice filled only with love, and so clear and bright was the love that even at the bottom, when she stirred it up to look, there wasn't a trace of sediment. But marriage, or was it sleeplessness, completely changed this, and there were perfect crowds of thought in her mind that she was thoroughly ashamed of. Remembering his words and wholeheartedly agreeing that to be able to tell each other everything, to have no concealments, was real marriage, the day after her wedding she first of all reminded him of what he had said, then plunged bravely into the announcement that she'd got a thought she was ashamed of. Weems pricked up his ears, thinking it was something interesting to do with sex, and waited with an amused, inquisitive smile. Gross. Weems, calm yourself. But Lucy, in such matters, was content to follow him, aware of her want of experience and of the abundance of his, and the thought that was worrying her only had to do with a waiter. A waiter, if you please. Weems's smile died away. He had had occasion to reprimand this waiter at lunch for gross negligence, and here was Lucy alleging he had done so without any reason that she could see, and anyhow roughly. Would he remove the feeling of discomfort she had at being forced to think her own heart's beloved, the kindest and gentlest of men, hadn't been kind and gentle but unjust, by explaining? Well, that was at the beginning. She soon learned that a doubt in her mind was better kept there. If she brought it out to air it and dispel it by talking it over with him, all that happened was that he was hurt. And when he was hurt, she instantly became perfectly miserable. Seeing then that this happened about small things, how impossible it was to talk with him of big things, of especially her immense doubt in regard to the Willows. For a long while she was sure he was bearing her feelings in mind, since it couldn't have changed since Christmas, and that when she arrived there, she would find that he had had everything altered and all traces of Vera's life there removed. Then, when he began to talk about the Willows, she found that such an idea as alterations hadn't entered his mind. She was to sleep in the very room that had been his and Vera's, in the very bed. And positively, so far was it from true that she could tell him every thought and talk everything over with him. When she discovered this, she wasn't able to say more than that hesitating remark on the chateau terrace about supposing he was going to change his bedroom. Yet, the Willows haunted her. And what a comfort it would have been to tell him all she felt and let him help her to get rid of her growing obsession by laughing at her. What a comfort if, even if he had thought her too silly and morbid to be laughed at, he had indulged her and consented to alter those rooms. But one learns a lot on a honeymoon, Lucy reflected, and one of the things she had learned was that Weems's mind was already made up. He's totally the type of person who, if he lived in the 21st century, would, yes, ooh, oh, I totally got chills. Yes, nudes, yes. And I'm upset. There seemed to be no moment when it was in a condition of becoming, and she might have slipped in a suggestion or laid a wish before him. His plans were sprung upon her full-fledged, and they were unalterable. Sometimes he said, "Would you like?" And if she didn't like, and answered truthfully, as she answered at first before she learned not to, there was trouble. Silent trouble. A retiring of Weems into a hurt aloofness, for his question was only decorative, and his little love should instinctively, he considered, like what he liked. And there, outside this aloofness, after efforts to get at him with fond and anxious questions, she sat like a beggar in patient distress, waiting for him to emerge and be kind to her. Of course, as far as the minor wishes and preferences of every day went, it was all quite easy, once she had grasped the right answer to the question, "Would you like?" She instantly did like. "Oh, yes, very much," she hastened to assure him. And then his face continued content and happy instead of clouding with aggrievement. But about the big things it wasn't easy, because of the difficulty of getting the right flavor of enthusiasm into her voice, and if she didn't get it in, he would put his finger under her chin and turn her to the light and repeat the question in a solemn voice, precursor, she had learned, of the beginning of the cloud on his face. How difficult it was sometimes. When he said to her, You'll like the view from your sitting room at the Willows." She naturally wanted to cry out that she wouldn't, and ask him how he could suppose she would like what was to her a view forever associated with death. Why shouldn't she be able to cry out naturally if she wanted to talk to him frankly, to get his help to cure herself of what was so ridiculous by laughing at it with him? She couldn't laugh all alone, though she was always trying to. With him she could have, and so have become quite sensible. For he was so much bigger than she was, so wonderful in the way he had triumphed over diseased thinking, and his wholesomeness would spread over her too, a purging, disinfecting influence, if only he would let her talk, if only he would help her to laugh. Instead, she found herself hurriedly saying in a small, anxious voice, "Oh, yes, very much." Is it possible, she thought, that I am abject? Yes, she was extremely abject, she reflected, lying awake at night considering her behavior during the day. Love had made her so. Love did make one abject, for it was full of fear of hurting the beloved. The assertion of the scriptures that perfect love casteth out fear only showed, seeing that her love for Everard was certainly perfect, how little the scriptures really knew what they were talking about. Well, she couldn't tell him the things she was feeling. Why couldn't she get rid of the sorts of feelings she couldn't tell him and just be wholesome? Why couldn't she be at least as wholesome about going to that house as Everard? If anybody was justified in shrinking from the Willows, it was Everard, not herself. Sometimes Lucy would be sure that deep in his character there was a wonderful store of simple courage. He didn't speak of Vera's death. Naturally, he didn't wish to speak of that awful afternoon, but how often he must think it, hiding his thoughts even from her, bearing them altogether alone. Sometimes she was sure of this, and sometimes she was equally sure of the very opposite. From the way he looked, the way he spoke, from those tiny indications that one somehow has noticed without knowing that one has noticed, that there are so far more revealing and conclusive than any words, she sometimes was sure he really had forgotten. But this was too incredible. She couldn't believe it. What had perhaps happened, she thought, was that in self-defense, for the preservation of his peace, he had made up his mind never to think of Vera. Only by banishing her altogether from his mind would he be safe. Yet, that couldn't be true either. For several times on the honeymoon he had begun talking of her, of things she had said, of things she had liked, and if it was she, Lucy, who stopped him. She shrank from hearing anything about Vera. She especially shrank from hearing her mentioned casually. She was ready to brace herself to talk about her if it was to be a serious talk, because she wanted to help and comfort him whenever the remembrance of her death arose to torment him. But she couldn't bear to hear her mentioned casually. In a way, she admired this casualness, because it was a proof of the supreme wholesomeness Everard had attained to by sheer courageous determination. But even so, she couldn't help thinking that she would have preferred a little less of just this kind of wholesomeness in her beloved. She might be too morbid, but wasn't it possible to be too wholesome? Anyhow, she shrank from the intrusion of Vera into her honeymoon. That, at least, ought to be kept free from her. Later on, at the Willows, Lucy fought and fought against it, but always at the back of her mind was the thought, not looked at, slunk away from, but nevertheless fixed, that there at the Willows, waiting for her, was Vera. End of chapter 15. I am really enjoying the writing of this. Yeah, I'm super enjoying the writing of this. Like, I'm feeling so uncomfortable and just reading so much into the relationship. Like, I hate all of the characters I'm supposed to hate. I feel pity or feel worry or fear for the characters I'm supposed to feel those things for. And the sort of seamless flow from character thought to character thought is really nice. And yeah, like even throwing in the annoying but so telling detail that Weems thinks in third person is very spot on. Chapter 15. No, thank you. Yeah, exactly. Right. He could have come across exactly as just comically cringy, but he feels dangerous. And also, this same relationship, same character characteristics in these characters, same flaws, everything like that, is definitely something that still happens today. Yeah. And with that unease, it's not like secondhand embarrassment, like you said, Falkor. It's not comically cringy. It's just, I am uncomfortable because I know how stories like this end. I know how relationships like this are. So, yeah, it is very dangerous and very uneasy and scary and uncomfortable. Yes, absolutely. A lot of people still do not recognize the signs of abuse. And it is so much harder to recognize them if you are in the relationship. Like being an outsider, it is the perspective that we wish that the people in the relationship have. Absolutely. It's always that same feeling of watching, yes, any real tragedy like the Titanic. Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. What? Oh, okay. Are you dancing? You dancing during the break? Oh, hi. All right. Chapter 16. We're 42% of the way through. Those who go to Strorley and cross the bridge to the other side of the river have only to follow the towpath for a little to come to the willows. It can also be reached by road, through a white gate down a lane that grows more and more willowy as it gets nearer the river and the house, but is quite passable for carts and even for cars, except when there are floods. When there are floods, this lane disappears, and when the floods have subsided, it is black and oozing for a long time afterwards, with clouds of tiny flies dancing about in it if the weather is at all warm. And the shoes of those who walk stick in it and come off, and those who drive, especially if they drive a car, have trouble. But all is well once a second white gate is reached, on the other side of which is a gravel sweep, a variety of handsome shrubs, nicely kept lawns, and the willows. All right, we're here. There are no big trees in the garden of the willows, because it was built in the middle of meadows where there weren't any, but all around the iron railings of the square garden, and the house being the center of the square, and concealing the wire netting which keeps the pasturing cows from thrusting their heads through and eating the shrubs, is a fringe of willows, hence its name. A house, said Weems, explaining its names to Lucy on the morning of their arrival, should always be named after whatever most insistently catches the eye. Crimson Peak intensifies. Then oughtn't it to have been called the cows? Asked Lucy, for the meadows round were strewn thickly as far as she could see with recumbent cows, and they caught her eye much more than the tossing bare willow branches. No, said Weems, annoyed. It ought not to have been called the cows. No, of course I didn't mean that, she said hastily. Lucy was nervous, and said what first came into her head, and had been saying things of this nature the whole journey down. She didn't want to. She knew he didn't like it, but she couldn't stop. Especially in a drive car, yes. Absolutely, absolutely. Nudes, you're totally right. Oops. Welcome to my house, Big Heifers. I would love for my house to be called Big Heifers. They had just arrived and were standing on the front steps while the servants unloaded the fly that had brought them from the station, and Weems was pointing out what he wished for her to look at and admire from that raised-up place before taking her indoors. Lucy was glad of any excuse that delayed going indoors, that kept her on the west side of the house, furthest away from the terrace and the library window. Indoors would be the rooms, the unaltered rooms, the library past whose window, the sitting room at the top of the house out of whose window, the bedroom she was going to sleep in with the very bed. It was too miserably absurd, too unbalanced of her for anything but shame and self-contempt. How she couldn't get away from the feeling that indoors waiting for her would be Vera. It was a gray, windy morning, with low clouds scurrying across the meadows. The house was raised well above flood level, and standing on the top step, she could see how far the meadows stretched beyond the swaying willow edge. Gray sky, gray water, green fields. It was all gray and green except the house, which was red brick with handsome stone facings, and made, in its exposed position unhidden by any trees, a great splotch of vivid red in the landscape. Like blood, said Lucy to herself, and was immediately ashamed. Oh, how bracing, she cried, spreading out her arms and letting the wind blow her serge wrap out behind her like a flag. It whipped her skirt round her body, showing its slender, pretty lines, and the parlor maid, going in and out with the luggage, looking curiously at this small, juvenile new mistress. Oh, I love this wind. Don't take me indoors yet. Weems was pleased that she should like the wind, for was it not by the time it reached his house part, too, of his property? His face, which had clouded a little because of the cows, cleared again. The cows is capital, the cows, and I love that. There was also a moment, I didn't mention this earlier because I wanted to double check, but there was a moment earlier when Lucy was talking or like thinking about all of the things that Weems sort of commanded or demanded emotionally from her. And in this one sentence specifically, like the word him was capital. And I thought that was interesting and very telling. So the use of capitalization every once in a while is really cool. And that, yeah, if it when it it might come up again. If it does, I will be sure to point it out. I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't something that I missed before and that it was a constant thing, but it is not. So if it happens again, I'll definitely point it out for sure because that's just super interesting. But she didn't really like the wind at all. She never had liked anything that blustered and was cold, and if she hadn't been nervous, the last thing she would have done was to stand there letting it blow her to pieces. "And what a lot of laurels!" she exclaimed, holding on her hat with one hand and with the other pointing to a corner filled with these shrubs. "Yes, I'll take you round the garden after lunch," said Weems. "We'll go in now. And the laurestinus, I'm guessing that's a flower. I have not heard of this flower before. Laurustinus? I love laurustinus. I'm gonna throw it in chat just because I'm probably totally saying it wrong. Oops. Laurustinus. Yes, Vera planted that. It has done very well. Come in now. And look, what are those bare things without any leaves yet? I'll show you everything after lunch, Lucy. Come in." And he put his arm round her shoulders and urged her through the door. The maid was holding open with difficulty because of the wind. Understand the mentality of somebody wanting to, yes, to control their life in so fully a way, whether or not they are interested in it. If everyone is grown and consenting, that's one thing. Yes. Yes. And I don't think that's at all a naive statement. No, not at all. Mm-mm. Yeah, you're just being a decent person, nudes. They look like baby's breath. Okay, thank you so much for looking that up, Star. Thank you. There she was then, actually inside the willows. The door was shut behind her. She looked about her shrinkingly. They were in a roomy place with a staircase in it. "The hall," said Weems, standing still, his arm round her. "Yes," said Lucy. "Oak," said Weems. "Yes," said Lucy. He gazed round him with a sigh of satisfaction at having got back to it. "All oak," he said. You'll find nothing." I don't know what this word is. Hold on. Okay. "You'll find nothing gimcrack," which, cool, fun word. It means flimsy or poorly made, but deceptively attractive. "All oak," he said. "You'll find nothing gimcrack about my house, little love. Where are those flowers?" he added, turning sharply to the parlor maid. "I don't see my yellow flowers." "They're in the dining room, sir," said the parlor maid. "Why aren't they here, where I can see them first thing?" "I understood the orders were, they were always to be on the breakfast table, sir." "Breakfast table? When there isn't any breakfast?" "I understood—" "I'm not interested in what you understood." Lucy here nervously interrupted, for Everard sounded suddenly very angry by exclaiming, "Antlers!" and waving her unpinned down arm in the direction of the— "Yes," said Weems, his attention called off the parlor maid, gazing up at his walls with pride. "What a lot," said Lucy. "Aren't there? I always said I'd have a hall with antlers in it, and I've got it." He hugged her close to his side. "And I've got you, too," he said. "I always get what I'm determined to get." Mm. It's a species of flower in the family. Oh my gosh, okay. Native to the Mediterranean area of Europe and North America. Very cool. Thanks, nudes. "Did you shoot them all yourself?" asked Lucy, thinking the parlor maid would take the opportunity to disappear and a little surprised that she continued to stand there. "What, the beasts they belong to? No, not I. If you want antlers, the simple way is to go and buy them. Then you get them all at once, and not gradually. The hall was ready for them all at once, not gradually. I got these at Whittley's. Kiss me. This sudden end to his remark startled Lucy, and she repeated in her surprise, for there still stood the parlor maid. Kiss you? I haven't had my birthday kiss yet. Why, the very first thing when you woke up, not my real birthday kiss in my own home. She looked at the parlor maid, who was quite frankly looking at her. Well, if the parlor maid didn't mind, and Everard didn't mind, why should she mind? She lifted her face and kissed him, but she didn't like kissing him or being kissed in public. What was the point of it? Kissing Everard was a great delight to her, a mixture of all sorts of wonderful sensations, and she loved to do it in different ways, tenderly, passionately, lingeringly, dreamily, amusingly, solemnly, each kind in turn, or in varied combinations. But among her varied combinations there was nothing that included parlor maid. Consequently, her kiss was of the sort that was to be expected, perfunctory and brief, whereupon Weems said, "Lucy," in a hurt voice. She started. "Oh, Everard, what is it?" she asked, nervously. That particular one of his voice always by now made her start, for it always took her by surprise. Pick her way as carefully as she might among her feelings, there was always some, apparently, that she hadn't dreamed were there and that she accordingly knocked against. How dreadful if she had hurt him the very first thing on getting into the Willows, and on his birthday, too. From the start he woke that morning, all the way down to the train, all the way in the fly from the station, she had been unremittingly engaged in avoiding hurting him, an activity made extra difficult by the unfortunate way her nervousness about the house at the journey's end impelled her to say the kinds of things she least wanted to. Irreverent things, such as the silly remark on the house's name. She had got on much better the evening before at the house in Lancaster Gate where they had slept, because gloomy as it was, it anyhow wasn't the Willows. Also, there was no trace in it that she could see of such a thing as a woman ever having lived in it. It was a man's house, the house of a man who had no time for pictures or interesting books and furniture. It was like a club and an office mixed up all together, with capacious leather chairs and solid tables and Turkey carpets and reference books. She found it quite impossible to imagine Vera or any other woman in that house. Either Vera had spent most of her time at the Willows, or every trace of her had been carefully removed. Therefore Lucy, helped besides by extreme fatigue, for she had been seasick all the way from to New Haven. Weems, having crossed that way because he was fond of the sea, had positively been unable to think of Vera in those surroundings and had dropped off to sleep directly she got there and had slept all night. And of course, being asleep, she naturally hadn't said anything she oughtn't to have said, so that her first appearance in Lancaster Gate was a success. And when she woke next morning and saw Weems's face in such unclouded tranquility next to hers as he still slept, she lay gazing at it with her heart brimming with tender love, and vowed that his birthday should be as unclouded throughout as his dear face was at that moment. She adored him. He was her very life. She wanted nothing in the world except for him to be happy. She would watch every word. She really must see to it that on this day of all days no word should escape her before it had been turned round in her head at least 3 times and considered with the utmost care. Such were her resolutions in the morning, and here she was not only saying the wrong things, but doing them. It was because she hadn't expected to be told to kiss him in the presence of a parlor maid. She was always being tripped up by the unexpected. She ought by now to have learned better. How unfortunate. The comparison of her with the game trophies. Yes. Yes. He is absolutely a child. Absolutely. Oh, Everard, what is it? She asked nervously, but she knew before he could answer, and throwing her objections to public caresses to the winds, for anything was better than that he should be hurt at just that moment. She put up her free arm and drew his head down and kissed him again, lingeringly this time, a kiss of tender, appealing love. What must it be like, she thought, while she kissed him, and her heart yearned over him, to be so fearfully sensitive. It made things difficult for her, but how much, much more difficult for him, and how wonderful the ways his sensitiveness had developed since marriage. There had been no sign of it before. Interesting. Implicit in her kiss was an appeal not to let anything she said or did spoil his birthday, to forgive her, to understand. And at the back of her mind, quite uncontrollable, quite unauthorized, ran beneath these other thoughts this thought: I am certainly abject. This time he was quickly placated because of his excitement at getting home. Nobody can hurt me as you can, was all he said. Oh, but as though I ever mean to, she breathed, her arm round his neck. Meanwhile, the parlor maid looked on. Why doesn't she go? Whispered Lucy, making the most of having got his ear. Certainly not, said Weems out loud, raising his head. I might want her. Do you like the hall, little love? Very much, she said, loosing him. Don't you think it's a very fine staircase? Very fine, she said. He gazed about him with pride, standing in the middle of the Turkey carpet, holding her close to his side. Now look at the window, he said, turning her round when she had had time to absorb the staircase. Look, isn't it a jolly window? No nonsense about that window. No, oh, you can really see out of it, and it really lets in light. Vera, she winced, tried to stuff it all up with curtains. She said she wanted color, or something. Having got a beautiful garden to look out at, what does she try to do but shut most of it out again by putting up curtains? The attempt had evidently not succeeded, for the window, which was as big as a window in the waiting room of a London terminus, had nothing to interfere with it but the hanging cord of a drawn-up brown Holland blind. Through it, Lucy could see the whole half of the garden on the right side of the front door, with the tossing willow hedge, the meadow, and the cows. The leafless branches of some creeper beat against it and made a loud, irregular tapping in the pauses of Weems's observations. Plate glass, he said. Yes, said Lucy, and something in his voice made her add in a tone of admiration, Fancy. Looking at the window, they had their backs to the stairs. Suddenly she heard footsteps coming down from them, from the landing above. Who's that? She said quickly, with a little gasp, before she could think, before she could stop, not turning her head, her eyes staring at the window. Who's what? Asked Weems. You do think it's a jolly window, don't you, little love? The footsteps on the stairs stopped, and a gong she had noticed at the angle of the turn was sounded. Her body, which had shrunk together, relaxed. What a fool she was. Lunch, said Weems. Come along. But isn't it a jolly window, little love? Very jolly. He turned her round to march her off to the dining room, while the housemaid, who had come down from the landing, continued to beat the gong, though they were obeying it under her very nose. Don't you think that's a good place to have a gong? He asked, raising his voice because the gong, which had begun quietly, was getting rapidly louder. Then when you're upstairs in your sitting room, you'll hear it just as distinctly as if you were downstairs. Vera. But what he was going to say about Vera was drowned this time in the increasing fury of the gong. Why doesn't she leave off? Lucy tried to call out to him, straining her voice to the utmost, for the maid was very good at the gong and was now extracting the dreadfulest din out of it. Eh? Shouted Weems. In the dining room, whither they had proceeded by the parlor maid, who at last had left off standing still and had opened the door for them, as Lucy could hear the gong continuing to beat through though muffled now by the doors and distance, she said again, "Why doesn't she leave off?" Weems took out his watch. "She will in another 50 seconds," he said. Lucy's mouth and eyebrows became all inquiry. "It is beaten for exactly 2.5 minutes before every meal," he explained. "Oh?" said Lucy. "Even when we're visibly collected?" "She doesn't know that." "But she saw us." "But she doesn't know it officially." "Oh," said Lucy. "I had to make that rule," said Weems, arranging his knives and forks before accurately, more accurate. Oh my gosh, we're going to try that again. "I had to make that rule," said Weems, arranging his knives and forks more accurately beside his plate, "because they would leave off beating it almost as soon as they'd begun, and then Vera was late, and her excuse was that she hadn't heard. For a time after that, I used to have it beaten all up the stairs, right to the door of her sitting room. Isn't it a fine gong? Listen." And he raised his hand. "Very fine," said Lucy, who was thoroughly convinced there wasn't a finer, more robust gong in existence. "There. Time's up," he said, as 3 great strokes were followed by a blessed silence. He pulled out his watch again. "Let's see. Yes, to the tick. You wouldn't believe the trouble I had to get them to keep time." "It's wonderful," said Lucy. The dining room was a narrow room full of a table. It had a window facing west and a window facing north, and in spite of the uninterrupted expanse of plate glass was a bleak, dark room. But when the weather was bleak and dark, and one saw such a lot of it out of the 2 big windows, as one sat at the long table and watched the rolling clouds blowing straight towards one on the northwest, for Lucy's place was facing the north window, on Weems's left hand. Weems sat at the end of the table facing the west window. The table was so long that if Lucy had sat in the usual seat of wives opposite her husband, communication would have been difficult. Indeed, as she remarked, she would have disappeared below the dip of the horizon. Totally not a child. So adult. "I like a long table," said Weems to this. "It looks so hospitable." "Yes," said Lucy, a little doubtfully, but willing to admit that its length at least showed a readiness for hospitality. "I suppose it does. Or it would if there were people all round it." "People? You don't mean to say you want people already?" Good heavens, no," said Lucy hastily. Of course I don't. Why, of course, Everard, I didn't mean that," she added, laying her hand on his and smiling at him so as to dispel the gathering cloud in his face. And once more she flung all thoughts of the parlor maid to the winds. "You know I don't want a soul in the world but you." "Well, that's what I thought," said Weems, mollified. "I know all I want is you." Was this same parlor maid here in Vera's time? Lucy asked herself very privately and unconsciously, and beneath the concerned attentiveness she was concentrating on Weems. "What lovely kingcups," she said aloud. "Oh, yes, there they are. I hadn't noticed them. Yes, aren't they? They're my birthday flowers." And he repeated his formula. "It's my birthday, and spring's." But Lucy, of course, didn't know the proper ritual, it being her first experience of being one of Weems's birthdays, besides having wished him his happy his many happy returns hours ago when he first opened his eyes and found hers gazing at him with love. So all she did was to make the natural but unfortunate remark that surely spring began on the 21st of March. Or was it the 25th? No, that was Christmas Day. No, she didn't mean that. You're always saying things and then saying you didn't mean them, interrupted Weems, vexed, for he thought that Lucy, of all people, should have recognized the allegorical nature of his formula. If it had been Vera, now. But even Vera had managed to understand that much. I wish you would begin with what you mean. It would be so much simpler. What, pray, do you mean now? I can't think, said Lucy timidly, for she had offended him again, and this time she couldn't even remotely imagine how. End of chapter 16. So I am really nervous about the stairs. It seemed like we paid an absurdly long amount of time admiring the window, which is Vera's demise, to then also spend a very long time admiring or commenting or hearing people on the stairs. And I'm scared. Chapter 16. Stairs! The musical. Oh, I'm sorry. If it was a musical, there would have been an exclamation point afterwards. My mistake. But yeah, there was a lot about stairs, all oak, very fancy, and it's weird that we didn't get like a tour. We saw the entryway, hallway, stairs, window, and then it was lunchtime. I guess we're gonna get like a larger tour later, and it's also interesting and very telling that there it's very much his space and that there was no sign of any influences that Vera had in the decoration, and then the repeated he said that he didn't adjust anything. Some decent symbolism metaphor in that chapter. A lot of scary signs coming up. All right. Chapter 17. We're 47% of the way through. We got a long way to go on this roller coaster ride. I'm gonna change my lighting. I feel like it's far too bright for this story. There we go. That feels better. It's so sad watching her jump through hoops, doubting herself. Yes. Yes. Long road to take on this. Yes. Yeah, it is really sad. And of course she was going to say what she was going to say, but for fear of retribution in whatever form it's taking, she of course doubts and takes back what she's saying, and it's upsetting. All right, chapter 17. He got over it, however. There was a particularly well-made souffle, and this helped. I mean, souffle helps everything, does it not? Also, Lucy kept on looking at him very tenderly, and it was the first time she had sat at his table in his beloved home, realizing the dream of months that she should sit just there with him, his little bobbed hair, his little bobbed haired love, capital L, and gradually, therefore, he recovered and smiled at her again. It's a real thing that abusers change reveal that, yes. Yes, it is. Yeah, that's also a good point. Pointing out, he wasn't like this. He didn't do this before we got married. But what power she had to hurt him, thought Weems. It was so great because his love for her was so great. She should be very careful how she wielded it. Her Everard was made very sensitive by his love. He gazed at her solemnly, thinking this, while the plates were being changed. "What is it, Everard?" Lucy asked, anxiously. "I'm only thinking that I love you," he said, laying his hand on hers. She flushed with pleasure, and her face grew instantly happy. "My Everard," she murmured, gazing back at him, forgetful in her pleasure of the parlor maid. How dear he was. How silly she was to be so much distressed when he was offended. At the core, he was so sound and simple. At the core, he was utterly her own dear lover. The rest was mere incident, merest indifferent detail. Oh, he probably is. Yes, I'm sure that she's sitting in Vera's chair. Absolutely, absolutely. And like sowing in the seed of, yeah, we didn't even talk about the table. Sowing in the seed of like, you are my only person and obviously I'm your only person. How can you even think of like hosting people? And such like a power dynamic to have such a long table. It's very performative for sure. At the core, he was utterly her dear lover. The rest was mere incident, merest indifferent detail. "We'll have coffee in the library," he said to the parlor maid, getting up when he had finished his lunch and walking to the door. "Come along, little love," he called over his shoulder. The library. Yes, absolutely. The fewer people you have around, the less people ruin the illusion. Isolation absolutely is a huge abuse tactic. Don't we have coffee in the hall?" asked Lucy, getting up slowly. "No," said Weems, who had paused before an enlarged photograph that hung on the wall between the two windows, enlarged to life size. He examined it a moment and then drew his fingers obliquely across the glass from top to bottom. It then became evident that the picture needed dusting. "Look," he said to the parlor maid, pointing. The parlor maid looked. "I notice you don't say anything," he said to her after a silence in which she continued to look, and Lucy, taken aback again, stood uncertain by the chair she had got up from. "I don't wonder. There's nothing you can possibly say to excuse such carelessness." "Lizzie," began the parlor maid. "Don't put it on Lizzie." The parlor maid ceased putting it on to Lizzie and was dumb. "Come along, little love," said Weems, turning to Lucy and holding out his hand. "It makes one pretty sick, doesn't it, to see that not even one's own father gets dusted." "Is that your father?" asked Lucy, hurrying to his side and offering no opinion about dusting. "It could have been no one else's. It was Weems. Oh, it was me. It was Weems grown very enormous, Weems grown very old, Weems displeased. The photograph had been so arranged that whenever you moved to in the room, Weems' father watched you doing it. He had been watching Lucy from between those two windows all through her first lunch, and must, flashed through Lucy's brain, have watched Vera like that all through her last one. Even more enormous and old. Exactly. "How long has he been there?" she asked, looking up into Weems's father's displeased eyes, which looked straight back into hers. "Been there," repeated Weems, drawing her away for he wanted his coffee. "How can I remember? Ever since I've lived here, I should think. He died 5 years ago. He was a wonderful old man, nearly 90. He used to stay here a lot." Opposite this picture hung another next to the door that led into the hall. Also a photograph enlarged to life size. "Oh, hello, Captain Hardship. Welcome in. Hello, hello. How are you? Happy Tuesday." Lucy had noticed neither of these pictures when she came in, because the light from the windows was in her eyes. Now, turning to go out through the door led by Weems, she was faced by this one. It was Vera. She knew at once, and if she hadn't, she would have known the next minute, because he told her. "Vera," he said, in a matter-of-fact tone, as it were introducing them. "Vera," repeated Lucy under her breath, and she and Vera, for this photograph too, followed one about with its eyes, stared at each other. It must have been taken about 12 years earlier, judging from the clothes. She was standing, and in a day dress that yet had a train to it, trailing on the carpet, and loose, floppy sleeves from a high collar. She looked very tall, and had long, thin fingers. Her dark hair was drawn up from her ears and piled on top of her head. Her face was thin and seemed to be chiefly eyes, very big, dark eyes that stared out of the absurd picture in a kind of astonishment, and her mouth had a little twist in it as though she were trying not to laugh. Lucy looked at her without moving. So this was Vera, of course. She had known, though she had never constructed any image of her in her mind, had carefully avoided doing it, that she would be like that, only older. The sort of Vera she must have been at 40 when she died. Not attractive like that. Not a young woman. To Lucy at 22, 40 seemed very old, at least if you were a woman. In regard to men, since she had fallen in love with someone of 45, who was certainly the youngest thing she had ever come across, she had rearranged her ideas of age, but she still thought 40 very old for a woman. Vera had been thin and tall and dark in her idea of her, just as this Vera was thin and tall and dark, but thin bonily, tall stoopingly, and her dark hair was turning gray. In her idea of her, too, she was absent-minded and not very intelligent. Indeed, she was rather troublesomely unintelligent, doing obstinate, foolish things, and at last doing that fatal, obstinate, foolish thing which so dreadfully ended her. This Vera was certainly intelligent. You couldn't have eyes like that and be a fool. And the expression of her mouth, what had she been trying not to laugh at that day? Did she know she was going to be enlarged and hang for years in a bleak dining room facing her father-in-law, each of them eyeing the other from their walls, while 3 times a day the originals sat down beneath their own pictures at the long table and ate? Perhaps she laughed, thought Lucy, because else she might have cried. Only that would have been silly. And she couldn't have been silly, not with those eyes, not with those straight, fine eyebrows. But would she, herself, presently be photographed too, and enlarged and hung there? There was room next to Vera, room for just one more before the sideboard began. How very odd it would be if she were hung up next to Vera, and every day 3 times as she went out of the room was faced by Everard's wives. And how quaint to watch one's clothes as the years went by, leaving off being pretty and growing more absurd. Really, for such purposes, one ought to be just wrapped round in a shroud. Fashion didn't touch shrouds. They always stayed the same. Besides, how suitable, thought Lucy, gazing into her dead predecessor's eyes. One would only be taking time by the forelock. Oh, absolutely. And it's not mentioned in this description, but I'm wondering if Lucy, because Lucy also has dark hair and has also been commented on being, like, small. I'm wondering if this is sort of like a collection of the same type of woman for Weems. I worded that so weird, but I think not a surrogate, but like Vera 2.0, and he's just trying to sort of fill that gap that Vera left. I mean, clearly he like wanted to marry her pretty immediately. Rebound Vera, yes. A replacement, but without all those annoying opinions and personality. Yes. And I think that's why he also enjoys Lucy being so much younger, because she doesn't have those. She's not worldly. She's naive. She is easily swayed by the older, more experienced generation. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Totally, totally. Gross. Come along, said Weems, drawing her away. I want my coffee. Don't you think it's a good idea? He went on as he led her down the hall to the library door. To have life-sized photographs instead of those idiotic portraits that are never the least like people. Oh, a very good idea, said Lucy mechanically, bracing herself for the library. There was only one room in the house she dreaded going into more than the library, and that was the sitting room on the top floor. Her sitting room and Vera's. Next week we'll go to a photographer's in London and have my little girl done, said Weems, pushing open the library door. And then I'll have her exactly as God made her, without some artistic idiot or other coming butting in with his idea of her. God's idea of her is good enough for me. They won't have to enlarge much, he laughed, to get you life-size, you midge. Vera was 5'10". Now isn't this a fine room? Look, there's the river. Isn't it jolly being so close to it? Come round here. Don't knock against my writing table now. Look, there's only the towpath between the river and the garden. Lord, what a beastly day. It might just as easily have been a beautiful spring day and us having our coffee out on the terrace. Don't you think this is a beautiful lookout? So typically English, with the beautiful green lawn and the bit of lush grass along the towpath and the river. There's no river like it in the world, is there, little love? Say you think it's the most beautiful river in the world. He hugged her close. Say you think it's 100 times better than that beastly French one we got so sick of while with all those chateaux. Oh, 100 times better, said Lucy. They were standing at the window, with his arm round her shoulder. There was just room for them between it and the writing table. Outside was the flagged terrace, and then a very green lawn with worms and blackbirds on it, and a flagged path down the middle leading to a little iron gate. There was no willow hedge along the river end of the square garden, so as not to interrupt the view, only the iron railings and the wire netting. Terracotta vases, which later on would be a blaze of geraniums, Weems explained, stood at intervals on each side of the path. The river, swollen and brown, slid past Weems's frontage very quickly that day, for there had been much rain. The clouds scudding across the sky before the wind were not in such a hurry, but that every now and then they let loose a violent gust of rain, soaking the flags of the terrace again just as the wind had begun to dry them. How could he stand there, she thought, holding her tight so that she couldn't get away, making her look out at the very place on those flags not too far off. But the next minute she thought how right he really was, how absolutely the only way this was to do the thing. Perfect simplicity was the one way to meet this situation successfully. And she herself was so far from simplicity that here she was shrinking, not able to bear to look, wanting only to hide her face. Oh, he was wonderful, and she was the most ridiculous of fools. She pressed very close to him, and put up her face to his, shutting her eyes. For so she shut out the desolating garden with its foreground of murderous flags. "What is it, little love?" asked Weems. "Kiss me," she said, and he laughed and kissed her, but hastily, because he wanted her to go on admiring the view. She still, however, held up her face. "Kiss my eyes," she whispered, keeping them shut. "They're tired." He laughed again, but with a slight impatience, and kissed her eyes, and then, suddenly struck by her little blind face so close to his, the strong light from the big window showing all its delicate curves and delicious softness, his Lucy's face, his own little wife's, he kissed her really, as she loved him to kiss her, becoming absorbed only in his love. Also, what kind of sick torture is it to have your new wife, who was already uncomfortable living in this house because of Vera, look out the window where he found his wife, where he saw his wife fall, and just comment on the lovely view and not really let her look away? Please stop. "Oh, I love you. I love you," murmured Lucy, clinging to him, making secret vows of sensibleness, of wholesomeness, of a determined, unfailing future simplicity. "Stop, please." "Aren't we happy?" he said, pausing in his kisses to gaze down at what was now his face. For was it not much more his than hers? Of course it was his. She never saw it, except when she specially went to look, but he saw it all the time. She only had duties in regard to it, but he was on the higher plane of only having joys. She washed it, but he kissed it. And he kissed it when he liked, and as much as ever he liked. "Isn't it wonderful, being married?" he said, gazing down at this delightful thing that was his very own forever. I'm not sure if he's being just so self-absorbed that he's not thinking of it, or if it's a power play. Yeah, that could be it too. I think the latter, but if so, the omniscient narrator is unreliable. Yes, very good points, Falcor. Very good points. "Oh, wonderful," murmured Lucy, opening her eyes and gazing into his. Her face broke into a charming smile. "You have the dearest eyes," she said, putting up her finger and gently tracing his eyebrows with it. Weems's eyes, full at that moment of love and pride, were certainly dear eyes, but a noise at the other end of the room made Lucy jump so in his arms, gave her apparently such a fright, that when he turned his head to see who it was daring to interrupt them, daring to startle his little girl like that, and beheld the parlor maid, his eyes weren't dear at all, but very angry. The parlor maid had come in with the coffee, and seeing the two interlaced figures against the light of the big window, had pulled up short, uncertain what to do. This pulling up had jerked a spoon off its saucer onto the floor with a loud rattle, because of the floor not having a carpet on it, and being of polished oak, and it was this noise that made Lucy jump so excessively that her jump actually made Weems jump too. In the parlor maid's untrained phraseology, there had been a good deal of billing and cooing during luncheon, and even in the hall before luncheon there were examples of it. But what she found going on in the library was enough to make anybody stop dead and upset things. It was such, she said afterwards in the kitchen, that if she didn't know for a fact that they were really married, she wouldn't have believed it. Married people in the parlor maid's experience didn't behave like that. What affection there was exhibited before and not after marriage. and she went on to describe the way in which Weems, thus briefly and irreverently, did they talk of their master in the kitchen, had flown at her for having come into the library. "After telling me to," she said, "after saying, 'We'll have coffee in the library.'" And they all agreed, as they had often before agreed, that if it weren't that he was in London half the time, they wouldn't stay in the place 5 minutes. Oh, thank you, noodles. Thank you, thank you. Meanwhile, Weems and Lucy were sitting side by side in two enormous chairs facing the unlit library fire, drinking coffee. Very good, very good. Yes, have a good night. Maybe I'll see you in Falcor's stream. Meanwhile, Weems and Lucy were sitting side by side in two enormous chairs facing... Oh, I already read that. The fire was only lit in the evenings, explained Weems, after the 1st of April. The weather ought to be warm enough by then to do without fires in the daytime, and if it wasn't, it was its own lookout. "Why did you jump so?" he asked. "You gave me such a start. I couldn't think what was the matter." I don't know," said Lucy, faintly flushing. "Perhaps," she smiled at him over the arm of the enormous chair in which she almost totally disappeared, "because the maid caught us." "Caught us?" "Being so particularly affectionate." "I like that," said Weems. "Fancy feeling guilty because you're being affectionate to your own husband." "Oh, well," laughed Lucy, "don't forget I haven't had him long." "You're such a complicated little thing. I shall have to take you seriously in hand and teach you to be natural. I can't have you having all sorts of finicking ideas about not doing this and not doing the other before servants. Servants don't matter. I never consider them." "I wish you had considered the poor parlor maid," said Lucy, seeing that he was in an unoffended frame of mind. "Why did you give her such a dreadful scolding?" "Why?" "Because she made you jump so. You couldn't have jumped more if you had thought it was a ghost. I won't have your flesh being made so creep. Or to creep, excuse me." "But it crept much worse when I heard the things you said to her." "Nonsense. These people have to be kept in order. What did the woman mean by coming in like that?" We totally should have been keeping a red flag tally. Absolutely, yes. "Why, you told her to bring us coffee." "But I didn't tell her to make an infernal noise by dropping spoons all over the place." "That was because she got just as great a fright when she saw us as I did when I heard her." "I don't care what she got. Her business is not to drop things. That's what I pay her for. But look here. Don't you go thinking such a lot of tangled up things and arguing. Do, for goodness sake, try and be simple." "I feel very simple," said Lucy, smiling and putting out her hand to him, for his face was clouding. "Do you know, Everard, I believe what's the matter with me is that I'm too simple." Weems roared and forgot how near he was to being hurt. "You, simple. You're the most complicated—" "No, I'm not. I've got the untutored mind and uncontrolled emotions of a savage. That's really why I jumped." "Lord," laughed Weems, "listen to how she talks. Anybody might think she was clever, saying such big, long words, if they didn't know she was just her Everard's own little wife. Come here, my little savage. Come and sit on your husband's knee and tell him all about it." He held out his arms, and Lucy got up and went into them, and he rocked her and said, "There, there. Was it a little untutored savage, then?" But she didn't tell him all about it. First, because by now she knew that to tell him all about anything was asking for trouble, and second, because he didn't really want to know. Everard was... Wait a minute. Yes, okay. For some reason, My digital copy keeps like switching, like going to the wrong page. So, excuse me as I'm trying to figure out the right page. Okay. Okay, there we go. It was right. It just didn't seem right. Okay. Everard was beginning to realize with much surprise, preferred not to know. He was not merely incurious as to other people's ideas and opinions. He definitely preferred to be unconscious of them. This was a great contrast to the restless curiosity and interest of her father and his friends, to their insatiable hunger for discussion, for argument, and it much surprised Lucy. Discussion was the very salt of life for them, a tireless exploration of each other's ideas, a clashing of them together, and out of that clashing the creation of fresh ones. To Everard, Lucy was beginning to perceive discussion merely meant contradiction, and he disliked contradiction. He disliked even difference of opinion. There's only one way of looking at a thing, and that's the right way, as he said. So what's the good of such a lot of talk? The right way was his way. And though he seemed by his direct, unswerving methods to succeed in living mentally in a great calm, and though after the fervors of her father's set this was, to her, immensely restful, was it really a good thing? Didn't it cut one off from growth? Didn't it shut one in isolation? Wasn't it, frankly, rather like death? Besides, she had doubts as to whether it were true that there was only one way of looking at a thing, and couldn't quite believe that his way was invariably the right way. But what did it matter, after all, thought Lucy, snuggled up on his knee with one arm round his neck, compared to the great, glorious fact of their love. That, at least, was indisputable and splendid. As to the rest, truth would go on being truth whether Everard saw it or not. And if she were not going to be able to talk over things with him, she could anyhow kiss him. And how sweet that was, thought Lucy. They understood each other perfectly when they kissed. What, indeed, when such sweet means of communication existed, was the good of a lot of talk? "I believe you are asleep," said Weems, looking down at the face on his breast. "Sound," said Lucy, smiling, her eyes shut. "My baby. My Everard." End of the chapter. Let's see. Okay, we do have time for one more chapter. So this will be the last one for the night. We have officially hit 51%. So we are on the other side. Let's do it. All right, let's do it. Chapter 18. But this only lasted as long as his pipe lasted. When that was finished, he put her off his knee and said he was now ready to gratify her impatience and show her everything. They would go over the house first, and then the garden, and outbuildings. Oh, we're getting... I tries to prepare. Yeah, I don't... Is there a way to prepare? So we're getting the tour now. All right. No woman was ever less important than Lucy. However, she pulled her hat straight and tried to seem all readiness and expectancy. She wished the wind wouldn't howl so. What an extraordinary, dreary place the library was. Well, any place would be dreary at 2:30 on such an afternoon, without a fire and with the rain beating against the window, and that dreadful terrace just outside. Weems stooped to knock out the ashes of his pipe on the bars and the empty grate, and Lucy carefully kept her head turned away from the window and the terrace towards the other end of the room. The other end was filled with bookshelves from floor to ceiling, and the books in neat rows and uniform editions were packed so tightly in the shelves that no one but an unusually determined reader would have the energy to wrench one out. Reading was evidently not encouraged, for not only were the books shut in behind glass doors, but the doors were kept locked, and the key hung on Weems's watch chain. That is also extremely telling and creepy, and I hate all of it. So Lucy is basically not encouraged to read or educate herself any further than what she currently is. And Weems probably also doesn't read all that much if it's behind like a glass case. Weird. Lucy discovered this when Weems, putting his pipe in his pocket, took her by the arm and walked her down the room to admire the shelves. Yes, you're right. He wants her simple. One of the volumes caught her eye, and she tried to open the glass door to take it out and look at it. Why, she said, surprised. It's locked. Well, of course, said Weems. Why, but then nobody can get at them. Precisely. But people are so untrustworthy about books. I took pains to arrange mine myself, and they're all in first-class bindings, and I don't want them taken out and left lying anywhere by Tom, Dick, and Harry. If anyone wants to read, they can come and ask me. Then I know exactly what is taken, and can see that it is put back. And he held up the key on his watch chain. But doesn't that rather discourage people? Asked Lucy, who was accustomed to the most careless familiarity in intercourse with books, to books loose everywhere, books overflowing out of their shelves, books in every room, instantly accessible books, friendly books, books used to being read aloud, with their hospitable pages falling open at a touch. All the better, said Weems. I don't want anybody to read my books. Lucy laughed, though she was dismayed inside. Oh, Everard, she said. Not even me? You. You're different. You're my own little girl. Whenever you want to, all you've got to do is to come and say, Everard, your Lucy wants to read, and I'll unlock the bookcase. But I shall be afraid I may be disturbing you. People who love each other can't ever disturb each other. That's true, said Lucy. And they shouldn't ever be afraid of it. I suppose they shouldn't, said Lucy. So be simple, and when you want a thing, just say so. Lucy said she would, and promised, with many kisses, to be simple, and she couldn't help privately thinking it a difficult way of getting at a book. Macaulay, Dickens, Scott, Thackeray, British poets, English men of letters, Encyclopedia Britannica. I think there's about everything, said Weems, going over the gilt names on the backs of the volumes with much satisfaction as he stood holding her in front of them. Whittley's did it for me. I said I had a room for so-and-so many of such and such sizes of the best modern writers in good bindings. I think they did it very well, don't you, little love? Very well, said Lucy, eyeing the shelves doubtfully. Yes. I hate it so much. So much. She was of those who don't like the feel of prize books in their hands, and all Weems's books might have been presented as prizes to deserving schoolboys. They were handsome, their edges. She couldn't see them, but she was sure were marbled. They wouldn't open easily, and one's thumbs would have to do a lot of tiring holding while one's eyes tried to peep at the words tucked away towards the central crease. These were books with which one took no liberties. She couldn't imagine idly turning their pages in some lazy position out on the grass. Besides, their pages wouldn't be idly turned. They would be, she was sure, obstinate with expensiveness, stiff with the leather and gold of their covers. Lucy stared at them, thinking all this so as not to think other things. What she wanted to shut out was the wind sobbing up and down that terrace behind her, and the consciousness of the fierce intermittent squalls of rain beating on its flags, and the certainty that upstairs had Everard no imagination, she thought, with a sudden flare of rebellion, that he should expect her to use and to like using the very sitting room where Vera... With a quick shiver, she grabbed at her thoughts and caught them just in time. "Do you like Macaulay?" she asked, lingering in front of the bookcase, for he was beginning to move her off towards the door. "I haven't read him," said Weems, still moving her. "Which of all these do you like best?" she asked, holding back. "Oh, I don't know," said Weems, pausing a moment, pleased by her evident interest in his books. "I haven't much time for reading, you must remember. I'm a busy man. By the time I've finished my day's work, I'm not inclined for much more than the evening paper and a game of bridge." "But what will you do with me? What will you do with me, who don't play bridge?" "Lord, you don't suppose I shall want to play bridge now that I've got you," he said. "All I shall want is just to sit and look at you." She turned red with swift pleasure and laughed, and hugged the arm that was thrust through hers, leading her to the door. How much she adored him when he said dear, absurd, simple things like that. How much she adored him. "Come upstairs now and take off your hat," said Weems. "I want to see my bobbed hair looks like in my home. Besides, aren't you dying to see our bedroom?" "Dying," said Lucy, going up the oak staircase with a stout, determined heart. What a grand choice of words. The bedroom was over the library, and was the same size and with the same kind of window. He said my bobbed hair. Yes, that is his now. It is his bobbed hair. The bedroom was over the library, and was the same size as and with the same kind of window. Where the bookcase stood in the room below stood the bed, a double, or even a treble bed. So very big was it, facing the window past which Vera... It was of no use. She couldn't get away from Vera, having slept her appointed number of nights, fell, and was finished. But she wasn't finished. If only she had slipped away out of memory, out of imagination, thought Lucy. But she hadn't. She hadn't, and thus... And this was her room, and that intelligent-eyed, thin thing had slept in it for years and years, and for years and years the looking-glass had reflected her while she had dressed and undressed and dressed and undressed before it, regularly, day after day, year after year. Oh, what a trouble. And her thin, long hands had piled up her hair. Lucy could see her sitting there, piling it on the top of her small head, sitting at the dressing table in the window past which she was at last to drop like a stone, horribly, ignominiously, all anyhow. And everything in the room had been hers. Every single thing in it had been Vera's, including Lucy made a violent lunge after her thoughts and strangled them. Meanwhile, Weems had shut the door and was standing looking at her without moving. "Well?" he said. She turned to him nervously, her eyes still wide with the ridiculous things she had been thinking. "Well?" he said again. She supposed he meant her to praise the room, so she hastily began, saying what a good view there must be on a fine day, and how very comfortable it was. Such a nice big looking-glass. She loved a big looking-glass. And such a nice sofa. She loved a nice sofa. And what a very big bed, and what a lovely carpet. "Well?" was all Weems said when her words came to an end. "What is it, Everard?" "I'm waiting," he said. "Waiting?" "For my kiss." She ran to him. "Yes, yes," he said, when she had kissed him, looking down at her solemnly. "I don't forget these things. I don't forget that this is the first time my own wife and I have stood together in our very own bedroom." "But, Everard, I didn't forget. I only..." She cast about for something to say. her arms still round his neck, for the last thing she could have told him was what she had been thinking. Oh, how he would have scolded her for being morbid, and oh, how right he would have been. And she ended by saying as lamely and as unfortunately as she had said it in the chateau, "I only didn't remember." Luckily, this time his attention had already wandered away from her. "Isn't it a jolly room?" he said. "Who's got far and away the best bedroom in Storley? And who's got a sitting room all for herself, just as jolly? And who spoils his little woman?" Before she could answer, he loosened her hands from his neck and said, "Come and look at yourself in the glass. Come and see how small you are compared to the other things in the room." And with his arms round her shoulders, he led her to the dressing table. "The other things," laughed Lucy, but like a flame the thought was leaping in her brain. "Now what shall I do if when I look into this I don't see myself, but Vera? It's accustomed to Vera." "Why, she's shutting her eyes. Open them, little love," said Weems, standing with her before the glass and seeing in it that though he held her in front of it, she wasn't looking at the picture of wedded love he and she made, but had got her eyes tight shut. With his free hand he took off her hat and threw it on the sofa. Then he laid his hand on hers and said, "Now look." Lucy obeyed. And when she saw the sweet picture in the glass, the face of the girl looking at her broke into its funny, charming smile. For Everard at that moment was at his dearest. Everard, boyishly loving her, with his good-looking, unlined face so close to hers, and his proud eyes gazing at her. He and she seemed to set each other off. They were becoming to each other. Smiling at him in the glass, a smile tremulous with tenderness, she put up her hand and stroked her face. "Do you know who you've married?" she asked, addressing the man in the glass. "Yes," said Weems, addressing the girl in the glass. "No, you don't," she said. "But I'll tell you. You've married the completest of fools." "Now, what has the little thing got into its head this time?" he said. The use of thing and its is becoming more and more apparent in the objectification. And I hate it. "Everard, you must help me," she murmured, holding her face tenderly against hers. "Please, my beloved, help me. Teach me." "That, Mrs. Weems, is a very proper attitude in a wife," he said. And the four people laughed at each other. The two Lucys, a little quaveringly. "Now, come, and I'll introduce you to your sitting room," he said, disengaging himself. "We'll have tea up there. The view is really magnificent." End of chapter 18. So uneasy, so uncomfortable. And yeah, the red flags are just like pouring in. They were trickling before, and I feel like the comments were less frequent, or the actions were less frequent. His moods were obviously less frequent. And then now that they're married on the honeymoon, they were like a little faster, like maybe like a drizzling. And then now it is storming. The mask is coming off. Absolutely. You're home. You don't need to pretend to be the nice Everard that you were before, which he wasn't really all that nice before. He was just as manipulative, but now he doesn't necessarily need to be so secretive with his manipulation. Yeah, absolutely.